Let's get scratching.
Okay, so here is a tier list of mainline Final Fantasy games. I have played all of these games. Played all of these games to completion, except for these ones. I haven't played like the interim games like 10-2 and all that. Who cares? Okay. So, where are they? This one, this one, this one. Where's like 10-2? Yeah, that one. Start from the bottom. So, worst game in the series, 2. No questions asked. Final Fantasy II is one of the most respectable games in the series. It came out in a period in gaming history where game developers had just come out with like a lot of their main titles. Castlevania, Mario, Zelda, a lot of like the main big titles that we know and love had just come out. Game developers were like, well, where do we go from here? You know, we gotta shake up the formula somehow. And so here comes Final Fantasy. They just had their smash hit Final Fantasy 1. Final Fantasy 2 comes out. We respect them, right, for experimenting. That's the important part. We respect them for trying to figure out what to do next with the battle mechanics and the story, but it just did not work. The battle mechanics, just like a lot of other sequels that came out, like I mentioned, it was just a mosh pit. Like so much, like the grindiest. Oh my gosh, the way that you improve all your stats in the game, the way that the battle system operates, the story was a bit of a slog. It was just a mess. Yeah, the battle system in FF2 is automatically makes it the worst. Now FF2 does have good music, but literally every Final Fantasy game in the entire franchise has good music. So if I were to make a tier list based on the Final Fantasy music, most of the games would be like near the top because Square makes like some of the best music ever. But FF2 is without a doubt, without question, without debate, objectively the worst game in the entire franchise. Let's put that in there. FF12. Okay, so let me talk about this game for a second. When this game first came out, easily like right here, second worst game in the series. The battle pacing was just super slow. Oh my gosh. So historically the story went through several different modes where like the original directors and writers of the story kind of like got canceled halfway through, changed the main character of the story halfway through. That's why the main character really doesn't feel like the main character. The story in the beginning hooks you very well. It's got this very captivating story of like conquering a kingdom and reclaiming the homeland, but it just turns into a massive mess later on. The gameplay was just a mosh pit as well. This game had some terrible issues. Very slow paced. The battle music really wasn't all that great. Didn't have that punch. The battle animations just didn't have the same punch. They weren't it didn't feel exciting to play the game. But they came out with a remake. They added some new features, like you can speed up the game to ×2, ×4. A lot of quality of life features to the Gambit system as well that improve the game. It makes me want to move this up to here after playing the newer version, but it's still definitely down here, and it deserves to be down here just because it doesn't feel like a fleshed out game. It's literally not a complete game. The game literally didn't follow its intended design path. It's down here somewhere. I think it belongs in D tier. I would put it in F tier, but it's probably like D tier. FF8, very controversial game. D tier. I played through it. I just didn't like it. The story is convoluted. Time travel nonsense. Battle system is super grindy. You gotta charge all of your magic from the monsters. Is linked to your stats, but it disincentivizes you from using the magic that you took so long to accumulate, because every time you use magic, it lowers your stats mid-fight even. Yeah, it didn't really make much sense. I mean, Squall's a Joe, right? Chicks dig Squall, but I definitely don't think the game mechanics or the story is that great. Final Fantasy 1 is a classic. Honestly, not that great of a game. It's probably like down here somewhere. You get lost really easy. The pacing is really weird. It's a short game, so it's pretty fun to play. The remakes are really pretty, so it is a pretty decent game. As far as like quality of game, it's definitely like down here somewhere. As far as like the original trilogy, Final Fantasy 3 is definitely the best of the original trilogy. They really just went crazy on the job classes. All the job classes are incredibly good, and they fixed some of the pacing issues and some of that I don't know where to go feeling. 13 is down here. A lot of people hate Final Fantasy 13. The single redeeming factor that I have for Final Fantasy 13 is the battle system. One of the funnest battle systems I've ever played. I'm a real like action JRPG kind of guy. I've also played most Tales games. I really love action JRPGs, and I think FF13 has a nice mix of turn-based strategy and action RPG in the game. I think the different styles that you put, I actually think Final Fantasy 13 has like one of the best battle systems in the entire series. But obviously the rest of the game is like lacking, right? Like linear pathways, boring environment, convoluted story, too much jargon, uninteresting characters. So it has to be down here. But I truly believe that Final Fantasy story has one of, if not the best battle system in the entire franchise. FF9 is down here too. This game has very poor pacing, and the story just feels like a comic book, like a cartoon. Like it's making fun of itself at times, doesn't really take itself seriously. A lot of the characters are missing motivations to like actually like be in the party and follow along with the story. A lot of the side character plots really don't hook you. And Zidane himself is a very strange character. The game doesn't do an amazingly well job of explaining Zidane and his motivations either, or even like literally what he is like as a character. He's like the only human type character with a tail, and it like doesn't explain it until way later into the story, and even then it doesn't even do that well of a tail. The villain, the antagonist in the story, also doesn't get nearly enough screen time. The player literally does not care about the antagonist in Final Fantasy IX. Kuja shows up here and there, does some bad stuff, and then disappears. What is he doing? Where is he going? Why is he doing it? No one ever knows, and the story doesn't take itself seriously enough to explain it to the viewer properly. FF9 goes down here. You're going to spend way too much time playing this game because all the battle scenes, all the battle mechanics just take forever. Slowest Final Fantasy game in the entire franchise, that's for sure. FF11 is actually I haven't played. It's an MMO that I haven't played. We're starting to get into like the best games in the entire franchise category. Final Fantasy V is up here for sure, is in the B tier. Final Fantasy V, the story also is very cartoony, but Final Fantasy V took the job idea from Final Fantasy 1 and 3 and just like exploded it. The different interactions and mechanics and just cool little quirks that you can do and perform, all the synergy that exists in this game, in the battle system, and all of the job classes that you can do is absurd. I played this game twice. 3 times probably, and I just had crazy fun with it. The story is like super mega ultra average. It's not bad, it's not good, it's average. The battle system in this game, just the creativity that you can have. The only downfall behind this game is that in order to get to that limit of like creativity, you do kind of have to like grind a lot, for sure. You have to grind a lot to get the job points and whatnot. FF15 is down here somewhere. I don't know where to put it. FF15 is very similar to FF12 in that it's an incomplete game. It's a game whose development cycle got changed multiple times throughout the years, and as a result, we end up with this very incomplete game. As opposed to FF13, the incomplete game that we do end up receiving is far better. The battle system is much more interesting. The environments are very beautiful. They did what they could with the story. Some things don't make sense, obviously. Lunafreya is like barely on screen. The player has like no motivation for Lunafreya at all. And the antagonist is like not all that visible either. You know, open world style game, very good battle mechanics. 5 is probably overall a better game, so I'll probably leave it right here. But FF15 is definitely up here for sure, and is almost certainly much more enjoyable of a playthrough than everything else under here. Final Fantasy IV is a classic. It's the worst of the best games in the franchise, right? We're starting to get into like the all-time best games. It is the worst of the best games in the entire franchise, for sure. But it's still incredibly solid. Probably the best story out of all of the early games, quote-unquote. Early games, right? Very captivating. The music is all so memorable. The visuals were so nice for that age. And it was the first Final Fantasy game of its time to really have that overarching, very captivating story. Even though FF2 had specific characters as well, it didn't really just push the story the way the story and the music the way that FF4 did. There's really not a whole lot of bad things you can say about FF4. You can't really change job classes like you could in 1, 3, and 5. Every character has their own set job class, but personally, I actually prefer Final Fantasy games that have set job classes. Sometimes you have like choice fright where you have so many choices you like don't know what to do. So when you play FF5 and you can choose between like one of like 20, 25 whatever classes, sometimes you just like can't really figure it out. Final Fantasy X is up here as well. Definitely like the 3rd best game in the entire franchise. There's really not a whole lot of bad things to say about this game. I mean, Titus is kind of, or Titus, however you pronounce it, kind of a joke, but it's okay. You know, it really is okay. Like, it's a funny, at least, like, Titus is a joke, but at least it's a funny joke. You know what I mean? Yeah, the game is just solid. Like, the cutscenes, the music, the battle system, the fact that you can switch characters mid-combat is just so sick and adds to a lot of strategical synergy. I think everybody's jaw dropped the first time that they watched that cutscene with Yuna and Titus just dancing in the middle of the lake. There's a lot of cutscenes in this game. A lot of them are really good. Auron, just insane character. You get invested into pretty much all the characters in the story, which is really impressive. Like, there's not a single unlikable character in this whole story other than like Titus himself, honestly. There really aren't that many Titus haters because, again, he's a joke, but at least it's a funny joke. Final Fantasy X, definitely worth playing. I've played it so many times. Amazing game. Final Fantasy X has the best mini game of any RPG ever, period. Best minigame, easy. Blitzball, I could literally just buy a copy of Blitzball and just play Blitzball. Like, Blitzball is that good. There has never been made, nor will there ever be made, a better minigame than Blitzball. FF6 is my personal favorite Final Fantasy game in the franchise. Definitely S tier game. It's like, oh my gosh, where do I even start? I love how there's really no main character to FF6. Like, technically, a lot of people will come out like, well, Terra is the main character, right? No, not really. You don't really spend that much time focusing on Terra, and all the other characters in the story get so much screen time, it's absurd. So much screen time. You literally spend like 3/4 of the game, like, Terra isn't even in your party. In the early portions where all the characters are splitting up and you're doing all their side plots, and then they come back and they split up again, and you, like, Terra's not even like, Terra is like not the main character in the game. Everyone's the main character. And unlike Chrono Cross, FF6 did like a really good job of having character development for every single person. Every character feels unique and individual, and it feels so good. It feels so good. Everything about this game is memorable for me. My personal favorite game in the entire franchise. I played it so many times. Would do it again right now in a heartbeat. This game is absurd. Memorable scenes like suplexing a train, having a live orchestra in the game. Like, oh my gosh, it's insane. But I do agree that FF7 is probably like the most objectively best Final Fantasy game in the series. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it because you guys already know. You guys are already like Cloud Buster Sword Heads. It's got the remake for the reason. You know, FF7 got the remake, not FF6. So just comprehensive story. The only thing I think FF7 doesn't do well with its story is that it's kind of interesting. 90% of the FF7 story happens before you even play the game. Everything about Nibelheim and Sephiroth and the Ancients, Hojo, all of that stuff happens before you even, like, it's all just in the past. It all just happens before you even start playing the game. You really have to pay attention, keen attention to the story in order to understand where you at. But yeah, so I do think that the game just doesn't do a good enough job explaining how the sequence of events happen in the story. But that's like the only bad thing about the game, in my opinion. The battle system is good, music's great. I don't know where to put FF14, honestly. It's another MMO, so I'm like tempted to put it in Who Cares. The story to this game is like all over the place. Personally, I don't really care about it. I have fun playing the game. I don't know. Personally, I really want to put it in the Who Cares category. But if I had to give it a rank, probably like somewhere around here. It's an MMO, so there's just so many just drag slog portions of the story. ARR and Heaven's Sword is like a snooze fest. Stormblood picks it up, and Shadowbringers is obviously like where all the interesting stuff is. But there's still just a lot of really dumb fetch quests, MMO style. The raids are really good. A lot of reused content and mechanics though. Probably be like somewhere around here, something like this. But I mean, I'm really, since it's an MMO, I was really tempted to just put in the who cares category. Very solid my list. Not really a whole lot I would change about it. I could probably see myself switching these two, depending on like who you are. Like in terms of historical significance, Final Fantasy 1 could be higher on the list. Probably gonna get the most flack for my Final Fantasy 8 placement, but this game, I mean, I played it. It just wasn't my cup of tea. I gotta be honest. It is what it is, right? It is what it is.